Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Territories Talk for today, Thursday, the 20th of March, 2025. I'm Shirley Osborne. I'm going to be your host today, but before I begin, let me acknowledge my co-hosts, Christopher Famous, who is backstage today, and Shayna Smith. I am alone today, and we are speaking with Anguilla. Before I go any further, however, before we get into Anguilla, let me acknowledge our media partners: Radio Turks and Caicos Islands, Radio Montserrat, Cayman Marl Road, CBN in the US and the British Virgin Islands, Channel 82 in Bermuda, and CBC Channel 8 in Barbados. We are online. We are streaming also on YouTube. We are hoping to have a really wonderful discussion this afternoon. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We are going to be speaking with Anguilla, like I said. Anguilla has what, sadly, we're having to call an historic moment, because it's the first time that Anguilla has elected a woman to lead the government. We wish that it were the norm to have women in parliament, women leading countries. As a matter of fact, last week, the chair of CARICOM, Ms. Motley, Prime Minister Motley from Barbados, speaking in the House of Parliament in Barbados, said, I will stand with my brothers. I wish I could say, and my sisters, Caribbean leader colleagues. So we're going to talk about Anguilla. We're speaking today with Mrs. Josephine Gumbs-Connor, who is a political woman, and has been very instrumental in political activity in Anguilla. Here on Territories Talk, you know that we focus a lot on women's leadership. We believe in women's leadership. We believe it's important that women be part of the highest levels of leadership in our region, and we support women in leadership. So let me first congratulate Premier Richardson Hodge on her election, and let me welcome from Anguilla, Mrs. Josephine Gumbs-Connor, who's going to be talking to us about where Anguilla is right now. Good afternoon, ma'am, and welcome.
Good afternoon, Ms. Osborne, and thank you for the warm invitation. Yes, we're just coming out of International Women's Day recognition, and Anguilla feels especially proud that we can now say that we are joining the ranks of those who have broken the glass ceiling.
Yes.
And on the on Mrs. Richardson Hodges' premiership. Quite a remarkable period. It happened on quite a historic day itself, that she would have been sworn in as premier. And a lot of checked boxes. Black History Month. It happened during Black History Month. It happened on the day that Anguilla actually was a day back in 1967 that kind of heralded Anguilla's angst in seeking to a move towards self-determination. And so we feel very proud all around.
And we are very proud of you. I can tell you that we are very proud of Anguilla for having moved this forward. Let me tell you, when I heard Prime Minister Motley say that the other day, I felt it, because I look at these they go to conferences and they take these photographs, and their suits. And of course, we love our men, but we would love to see some women. They need some women's energy in there. So I'm really proud of Cora. I met her some years ago when I was speaker. And so I'm really proud of her, and I'm proud of Anguilla for having done this. So let me ask you first, however, let me talk about you first. Tell us about your involvement in politics. What politics means to you.
So my involvement on politics, I would have to say, is more on this, believe it or not, on the sidelines. So I'm actually an attorney at law by profession. I've been called now to the bar. I think this year, 2025, is going to make 30 years at the bar.
Congratulations.
And so I'm getting up there. So I would say that my interest in politics really kind of started more from a level of seeing, I would say, da- daughters and their fathers have a special bond.
Mm-hmm.
And my father has been, his life was in the ministry. He was a Methodist minister. He's now retired, he's now
Mm-hmm.
99.
Oh.
But he was one of those persons who was a groundbreaker. And the Methodist Church, when he would have started in the ministry, was really under the Church of England,
Mm-hmm.
that very broad umbrella. And so he was one of 7 ministers, Methodist ministers, young Black Methodist ministers in the Caribbean, who decided to break away from the umbrella of the Methodist Church in England, and was created with its own constitution, the Methodist Church of the Caribbean and the Americas. So I would say he was one of those persons who had a very, very strong positioning on
Mm-hmm.
what independence and what Black excellence and what the advancement of Caribbean people was all alike. So growing up, I think he kind of earned the respect for the fact that he was prepared to stand up for people. His
Mm-hmm.
platform was the pulpit. And he, all around, in so many of the islands that he would have worked, he was always about feeling the need to speak truth to power, where particularly people were either disenfranchised or, as that he would tell you, the church is about the people,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a duty to ensure to the health, the growth of its people. And so it's from that window that my childhood would have been crafted. So when I came out of school, I always say the reason that I went into law was because I had once been watching a movie and saw, I think it was back, a South African movie, and the level of injustice. And I was just moved. At 15 years old, I could remember distinctly, and I was in sixth
Mm-hmm.
form at that time. And so I decided that was my path. And coming out of school and settling into the learning of the practice of law, it wasn't long after, literally 1 year after, that I had been introduced and fostered a relationship with now the late Hubert Hughes,
Mm-hmm.
who was Anguilla's chief minister for some time, and also in opposition, and began to understand a bit about what politics was all about. He would have taken some blows and heat from taking me on his one of the as the youngest person on the team back in 1996 to the UK. And you would be familiar as Speaker, Miss Osborne, with those yearly trips that
Yes, yes, yes.
the yearly treks that our overseas Caribbean territory leaders have to make to the good UK to
Yep.
explain themselves and to, I suppose, one would even say, receive instructions. So at a very tender, year within my practice, I was accompanying him, and so I was given that very early window of understanding this dynamic between the British and Anguilla, and some turbulent periods. You would remember
Mm-hmm.
back in the 90s, things like the Rifkin letter, in which
Mm-hmm.
they were seeking, well, in Anguilla's case, seeking more, a greater level of power constitutionally. And so I was right there in the mix, and in trying to understand how you approach these matters, always with a view to how you're going to be advancing your people.
Mm-hmm.
So it started from then, and I would say that I have always kind of, never being in politics as a
Mm-hmm.
politician, but always being very, very mindful that I see it as an advocate, really, how I can assist my people to be able to continue what I always say is a struggle. It's a struggle. It's
It
these
is.
things are not about battles, the one off here or there. It's really the continuous march. And it is hoping that we are marching towards an end goal. So
Yes.
that really has been, my background. And in 2015, I actually served formally as the independent advisor to the chief minister at that time, Chief Minister Hughes again. And so, it gave me even greater access to understanding this very dynamic relationship between the British, between us, and also ensuring in my hobby time as being a talk show host in Anguilla for several years with Class FM Studio,
Mhm.
how you engage with your people, how you break down the tough subjects in digestible bits that they can understand. Because when
Yes.
your people are with you in understanding what the issues are, we're so much further ahead.
Absolutely. It makes everything that much easier. And that's one of the concerns. And obviously, when we talk about women in politics, women in leadership, that's something that always comes up. Women are much more communicative, and are much more open to dialogue and discussion and informing people, letting people know. So I want to ask you, on both sides, I find politics absolutely fascinating. My father's a politician,
I
and
know.
I same as you. I watch him. My mother's a
Fathers and
teacher.
daughters, fathers and
I
daughters.
tell you, it's one of those things, man. And I watched him deal with. He's also a businessman, so I got to see, and a businessman dealing with the sea, and so I got to see him work with people with stevedores on the docks, and deal with people in parliament and with dignitaries visiting from other countries and so on. And I was always fascinated by his ability to shift, to move between groups, between communities, amongst environments. Have you never thought of actually running for office and being in there?
So I wouldn't say, well, I would say I've been asked
I
a few
imagine so.
times,
Yes.
but I it perhaps never caught me at the times when I felt that that was the best
Hmm.
way that I could assist my people. Let me put it that way. I believe that I value my independence a lot as a person. And I am always conscious that in certain roles, even at that level, there you take on the responsibility which does not always leave you with that room and scope
Hmm. Hmm.
to be able to, how should I say, to be unequivocal. Let me, sometimes that
That's a
might
very good way of putting it.
be
I like that.
yes, unequivocal, and perhaps uncompromising. Now, that's
Hmm.
not to say that I don't value, because I certainly think that in the area of politics, you are in the area to be able to move the needle
Hmm.
for your people.
Yes.
So it's a very hallowed role, and one to be utterly respected, provided that those who hold that role treat it with a level of respect, care, compassion, intelligence, and conscious that you are carrying with you the entire nation.
Hmm. Hmm.
I often feel that I am conscious that as a politician, you need to have some kind of, you have to be, maybe an older school thought, because when I look at politicians now coming on board, they operate as a team of people. When you look, for example, at politicians uh, of the of a different era before. The era of, let's say, in our past, Hubert Hughes, etc. These were people who knew not just the people in their district, but they understood those family connections. They could go deep,
Yes.
literally a generation, so that the people who they're coming, who they're representing, they carry with them a depth of knowledge. And I often felt I would describe myself by virtue of the fact that I was a minister's daughter. I traveled. I went with where my parents went, obviously. So I call myself many times nomadic because I've lived in Dominica, I've lived in St. Martin, I lived in St. Kitts, I went to school in Barbados, I then went on to Trinidad. So I consider myself very much a Caribbean woman. But I don't think that I could claim the kind of historic depth that I think a politician should have for the community or the district that they are serving. Now, of course, we're in a different environment. We now have seats at large as opposed to just district seats. And so, in a different life, perhaps, where there was the opportunity to represent Anguilla. People know my voice, and I know, people in general. But to say that I would be honest enough to say that I can't, trace those from family, with the level of depth that I think the traditional politician would have. And so I kind of always respected that district representative was a specific, if you took on that work honestly, then you had to be so deeply interwoven within that district that you could feel comfortable. And I would say personally that I am honest enough to understand that I did not have that kind of historic depth in terms of the representation of a district. So in the role that I have, I'm very comfortable in that I try to be honest at all times in my debate and in my conversations and discussions with the public. And so I think that I have I think I have earned, I would say, that kind of respect from my community, to be fair, unequivocal when I need to be, and uncompromising when I need to be, without feeling that I have to weigh, the weight and balance of other relationships that could influence a little bit of what my positions might be, as a politician may have from time to time to do.
Yes, I get you. This put a tightrope after all.
Around the globe, and hopefully I came back to the bullet point.
That is what we call communication. We get all the information that we need. Yeah, and it's important. I mean, it is a good point that you make. There was that sort of deep knowledge of our people, but times have changed. There's been a lot of migration in Anguilla, as in Montserrat, in Bermuda, everywhere in the world, pretty much. And so that deep connection has gone. And now I remember the last election in Montserrat last year, we had people considering whether it was even necessary for people to go door to door and house to house, or if you could just social media, because there were those conversations. The people have changed, the times have changed. So how do we do politics anymore? And that's a really, really good question. But let me just remind people that we're here. It's Territories Talk, and we are speaking with Anguilla. Mrs. Josephine Gumbs-Connor. We're talking about politics and what's new in Anguilla. But before we get to what I really want to get to, let me ask you about Anguilla's development, because Anguilla is on a roll. But some years ago, Anguilla was on a roll, and then stuff happened. I remember there's a time when the building stopped, the construction stopped, and so on. But you've picked up and you're moving ahead. Tell us a little bit about that, because in Montserrat, for example, we are talking about your new arena, your amphitheater, your new entertainment area. We are talking about your new marina, because we want a marina in Montserrat so badly, and you are you're beginning to do that. So tell us about Anguilla. Tell me how you feel about Anguilla's development direction right now.
So I would say that Anguilla saw some interesting dynamics. There was a time that we obviously had some major challenges. I think it's fair to say that if we look, for example, of the period 2017 to where we are now, we always, all of our islands, I'm sure, record as a marker Hurricane Irma. That put a hurting on anyone in the best of times. And where we were then with Hurricane Irma and the level of devastation really kind of put us in a bind. A lot of infrastructure, which was itself somewhat aged. There were some brutal blows that required, demolition, so to speak. There has always been the issue of access in Anguilla with respect to our airport, a shortened runway, some basic infrastructures or health in relation to the infrastructure there, the access to medical services, also a challenge. And while our tourism industry has, for the most part, kept us buoyant, there was always the fact that there wasn't that sufficient flow of income to be able to, on our own, be able to handle a lot of the infrastructural needs that we had. So in some ways, I would imagine Hurricane Irma was a bit of a boon, but in relation to funds that we were able to receive from the UK. But then we get hit with the second doozy of COVID. Anguilla took a very strong position. Who was out, who was in, was in. Mm-hmm. And it was a measure to try, I would imagine, to mitigate our circumstances. Again, when you look at what the context of our hospital services, were, anything could easily create a situation of distress. So, of course, we took a heavy hit with COVID. And just after COVID would have been elections and with a new government being installed. Their mandate and their campaign was about the need for progress. But one of the things that they spoke of quite stridently on was the fact that a proposed tax called the Goods and Services Tax was one that they heavily advocated would have been devastating to small business and essentially to the lives of Anguillians, because what it was doing was going to be adding 13% on goods and services. So that was their campaign. Of course, people in the current distress of trying to raise their heads above water of COVID latched onto that campaign message and resoundingly ushered in that Anguilla Progress APM movement into office. Now, as we just finished talking about the fact of the importance of what a politician should mean, and the fact that it should be really the highest honor in terms of professions, because you're carrying the weight and forging the direction of a nation. So that government came into office on that mandate. And as I often say to those who are naive to understanding that dynamic relationship between our islands and the British, no sooner had they got into office than the British presented to them what was styled in the rubric as a COVID agreement. That was a beautiful analogy that by its verbiage, COVID agreement, you think the magnanimous nature of what would be given by way of mitigating this poor little island's affairs in light of that situation. But to the opposite, what it did was totally handicapped. I would call it a decapitation, because I know that the British listen to everything that our leaders and potential leaders have to say. Yes. So having listened and having understood that this was a government that spoke so in such strong terms against GST, they immediately decapitated them by having them sign this agreement to enact the very thing that they told their people they would not do in this agreement. Unfortunately, the government under the premiership then of Dr. Webster did not see it fit, even though they were on this wave of support. They did not see it fit to come to the people before signing that agreement and say, hey, this is what we have been faced with. What do you think we should do? And when we talk about participatory democracy, these are the things that our people, the high expectations that we place on our leaders, because this was a capital moment that they could have come to the people, explained the circumstances, and get the same mandate that they had gotten from the people to enter into the administration, to be able to come to the table of the British and say, this is what our people are saying.
Yeah.
Instead, they completely rolled over. They signed the agreement. And of course, the British, in their true style, sought to sweeten the pot by, I suppose, giving them far more leverage to accomplish more projects than perhaps have been done in over decades. But it was to sweeten that pot of, one, decapitating them in front of the public. And I'm a student of West Indian history, and we understand what the plantation system was about and how it ran as effectively as it did, with the inequity between the numbers of the plantation owners compared to the numbers of the people. And so, to me, this was the classic. Dr. Hilary Beckles could launch an entire treatise.
A lecture, on that.
on what that meant. Because effectively, it told the people that your leaders can't protect you.
Yes.
And so, what happened is that it went further. There were those within the administration, two of their politicians, two ministers, who felt the cry of the people, who said, no, you told us that how bad this was going to be. And you had the business community coming out, the restaurant community coming out. So many different groups were coming together in protest, in the consultations that they had. And they were saying, all the things were pointing to this tax is going to kill local business. Two ministers of the government felt the conscience of the people. And so when the bill was brought to the House, even though it was done under the guise, I would have to say, of the Speaker of the House, as she then was, giving the impression to the people that she was launching this committee and she's going to take the cries of the people into control, because they had written to her directly. And while she gave that impression, within the last 1 minute and 30 seconds before the House closed, the bill was read and passed.
And passed.
People were stunned. People were
Yeah.
stunned. And one of the things that occurred, one of the ministers, well, actually both, initially crossed the floor. One went back. One stayed the ground, stayed the course,
Yeah.
took on the compassions and the cries of the people, and crossed the floor, stayed on the other side. The other would not have been sufficient, given the numbers, to have been able to pass the bill. And so what the UK did was activated their appointees, and in a never before heard situation of a tax bill, utilized the deputy governor, and the attorney general to be able to meet the numbers to pass this act.
Yes.
Let me just say, when we talk about progress, and you did ask that question on progress, the one thing Anguillians have sent back by way of messaging in the clean sweep of that previous administration are two things. Progress for them, for us Anguillians, is not measured by concrete. Progress is measured by the way the lives of the people are affected.
Yes, yes.
So that message resounded loudly, clearly. And it leads me to wonder now, in what exactly is the UK to read from this message? Because it is as though you strung our necks into passing this bill, and now we've handed it back to you on a platter. So it's going to be quite an interesting next few years.
Yes.
Because I think that the messaging from this particular administration is, we heard the cries of the people. We intend to review that GST with a view to ensuring that it does not reflect the depth of destruction that it has on our people. And I would be very cautious, if I were the British, to seek to intermingle in what is now the clear messaging that has been given by the people to this new administration to take to their doorstep.
Yes. I have to tell you, we were worried about you for a while there, charging on the House of Parliament and so on. We were very concerned.
Undeterred at one point, when some very heavily armed police officers were standing at the doors at one point in time. But I think Anguillians in general are peaceful, but we will make our message heard. And I think that I am so impressed by our people, because they have demonstrated they're not going to be forgetful. And this was important. This was important. So the flash of construction and the flash of a road here and a road there, all of which I'm going to say it's not that it wasn't needed, but at what cost and at what price.
Yeah. Yes, that is something I also actually wanted to hear you talk about, because my first job when I fifth form, the summer after fifth form, before they sent me away to school, I worked at the tourist board, and ever since then I have had a very critical, and put it that way, view of tourism. And I know actually when I came back from school, I worked in tourism for 3 years also, so I know the stresses and the risks that come with these decisions. So, I'm excited about your summer festival and the boat rides and so on. And we are happy that Anguilla is doing well economically, or stands to do well economically. But there is that question: what do you give up in the meantime? What do you give up in exchange? And I think I read somewhere that Premier Richardson has some concerns about the direction of tourism. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, she hasn't formally articulated. Well, let me put it this way: the ministries have now been designated, and our new Minister of Tourism is Mr. Cardigan Connor.
Mm-hmm.
The government has explained that in these first couple of weeks, they are grooving in, as it were, into their ministries. They are trying to get a finger on the pulse for certain factors related to these various projects, which may impinge on certain other fiscal measures. So they're doing a very in-depth review of what they are facing. And I think following that will then, flesh out in greater detail what are going to be their policies and how they are going to marshal some of these various things that are popping up. As with anything, when it comes to tourism, a lot of tourism tends to be funded, as it were, by investors who are coming into the island with a view of developing, of course, with a profit in mind.
Of course.
And a lot of this tourism center also engage memoranda of understanding, in which, of course, they are getting certain levels of concessions. There always has to be a balance. And I think that Premier Hodge is going to be looking at whether the investors who are currently in Anguilla were operating with that balance being the threshold, the proper threshold. As always, and I don't know what's the status in other islands, but I do know that there is always still a little bit a question, and certainly in the mind of Anguilla, whether our people are in the top managerial positions that in which we can culturally really claim our island, insofar as tourism is concerned, as being our island. And Anguilla is still struggling, I would say, to keep a pace with us as Anguillians being at the very top. There used to be a time when there would, I think, have been at least 2 local general managers who were actually the general of 2 of our big hotels. Now we have the injection through some of the hotels of a more corporate style, so that even if your persons are there, they are either under different titles, or even if they are managers, there's still a manager who's above them, sometimes not even on island, but off island. And so I think coming in on a mandate, as this new administration has, of people first, I think Premier Hodge is going to be carefully reviewing, and her team carefully reviewing, to ensure that if our people are indeed represented at the top, that it is a genuine representation.
Yes.
And I think that that has to be examined, because when you listen sometimes to the lower rungs within the industry, there's a lot of at the moment, we may cut a good image in terms of the different accolades that we receive, etc. But the question ultimately has to be, are your people who are in this service industry feeling that their work is respected, that the environments are one in which they can feel that there's growth based on merit, that they are they are players in their truest forms.
Yes.
And you always have to strike that balance, because in tourism we are really serving people. We are serving people, but we have to ensure that that service is not one that is demeaning, or
Meaning,
in
absolutely.
which we are just just at those levels. There must be
Yes.
that path of upward mobility, that you can feel, hey, once I am improving myself and
Mm-hmm.
improving my level of service,
Mm-hmm.
I can see a path where
Yes.
I can be going towards the top of whatever department is associated. Sorry, you're muted, Miss Osborne. You're
Sorry,
muted.
sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's really important this, because there is that slide that can happen really, really quickly. We are serving people, but we are not servants. And
Correct.
we're dealing in the Caribbean with people who live in countries where the relationships are not so good. Let me put it that way.
You
I
to
tell you
put it to
worse.
put it to put it better, the
Uh-huh.
relationships seem to be sliding downwards, because I
Downwards
don't
and
know,
really
in
fast
our
too.
market, North America is Anguilla's primary market.
Yes,
So
yes.
yes.
Yes, it's troublesome. I mean, and then, you travel to the Caribbean, so you've been to, for example, the airport in Antigua, and heard people complain, and you see stuff happen. You've been to Barbados, it's a really difficult line. It's a really delicate line that needs to be handled well, so that, in fact, we don't slide down. I look at Montserrat trying to rebuild, and I'm having those concerns. How much do we need to give away? But the
Yes.
question I want to ask you, I have another question, is about the environment, because that's a big deal. Yes, it's a really big topic. And Anguilla is a small island like Montserrat. You're building a massive marina. The pictures look really, really good. But I've sailed into Anguilla, and I know that much, if not all, of the water around it is national park. Yes, I remember we sailed in one.
Mm,
Yeah, we sailed in once into Anguilla. We got in. This was like 6 o'clock in the morning or something. We were sailing, I think, from Saba, and we had rods out there. We weren't trawling because we knew you weren't supposed to, right? So we had the rods were stuck in the holders at the back though,
mhm.
and the police had us stopped us. I said, we're not fishing. They said, no, put them away. So remove the temptation entirely, and then explain to us that yes, the pretty much all of it is national park. What is the plan for that, with a big super yacht marina coming on stream? How do you intend to manage that?
So I must say that I am yet to really fully understand
Mm,
the depth of what exactly are the permissions
mhm.
granted for the marina.
Yes.
So, yes, I know that there is a talk of the marina. Yes, I know there is even um, the full impression that it is progressing, but
Hmm.
I haven't seen it as yet. And I would be interested to understand what will be the approach of this particular administration to the marina. I would say
Yeah.
this: the concern that I have is that at all times there should be the balance of um, the concept of eco environmental thresholds and sustainability.
Hmm.
And sometimes I get a bit concerned about whether this balance is truly being struck.
Hmm.
So while I see it when I look at certain legislation still pending.
Yes.
It's there in the mix, it's drafted, and it gives you a cause for concern. Because, for example, there's one piece of legislation not brought by this administration, but it's drafted at one point during the previous administration. It looked like it was going to raise its head. But it was one, for example, in which it was saying that 150 feet from the high water mark inland and up to 1,000 feet seaward was going to be declared to be a coastal zone. And in this coastal zone, you are permitted to do nothing without a license by the government, or not really by the government, but certain boards within the scheme of the legislation. So you look at something like that, and with a history that we have had of our access to our beaches, of our access to fishing, what we would say on our sea rocks, with our access to enjoying and utilizing our sea. What exactly is the message that you would be sending by legislation like that? And so this is the kind of thing that affects the small man.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
then you have, a marina right in the middle of it. They get the waivers, as it were, to operate and do whatever they want.
Yeah.
So how do you balance? And what becomes sustainable? So these for me are the questions. I know that it causes, for example, the marina causes, you have that balance between, traditional guests who say, this is exactly going the route of what we're trying to stay away from, which is why we come to Anguilla. And then you have those in Anguilla, sometimes perhaps the younger demographic, that's saying, hey, we need more opportunities. If we're going to stay in Anguilla, we need more opportunities to be able to carve a living. And so it's a dynamic.
Yeah.
But to me, it should always be viewed with the eyes of ensuring that you're striking the balance. The small man is not paying and being penalized for the excesses of the rich.
Yeah.
And those that are more privileged. So I think that we always have to strike that balance and make sure that what we say our product is, that it fits within that domain. I know, yes, you want to go the luxury route, and but the people who have luxury are sometimes the most fickle, because they know they can go anywhere at any moment.
Yep.
Any moment. So
Yes.
we have to make sure that our product remains true to purpose, true to
Yes.
self,
No.
and to ensure that our culture, and I think this is where hopefully this administration is going to ensure that Anguilla's culture is not being devalued, but instead we are making sure that it's amplified and it's flourishing, and that it really is Anguillian. So that just like when you dock into Jamaica, you're very clear that this is man, Jamaica. Then likewise, we want that, when you come to Anguilla, you have to say, ooh, Anguilla nice. So
yes, yeah. We hope it stays that way. It's really important. It's really important. And they always talk about the environment, and the environment is not just, for me, it's not just the quote unquote natural environment, the people, how the people live and how the people feel about it. So we're going to come to, we have a few minutes. I think we're about 15 minutes out, 11 minutes. So we kind of have to move a little bit fast. So let me just get to the point. Folks,
Sure.
you're listening to Territories Talk, and we are speaking with Mrs. Josephine Gumbs-Connor from Anguilla. We're talking about Anguilla. And so let's talk about politics and Madam Premier. They voted her in, so obviously they want her. How did Anguilla get to this? I mean, not, and I don't mean that bad, but I mean, this is something that we've all aspired to. Women have been working for decades to get inserted into office like this. And Mrs. Hodge did it. What happened over the last few months or years, perhaps, do you think that, and I'm assuming here that Anguillans are like the others of us who love women, we love women's work, and yet we are always reluctant to put them into positions of power. How did that switch for Anguilla? When, can you pinpoint a time when it switched? or
I
an
would
event?
say that I would have to say that that's a credit to her party. So within her party ranks, uh, she would have succeeded Mr. Victor Banks, who was one of the flag bearers in
Yes.
the Anguilla United Front. And when he was seeking to take retirement, whatever their party protocols were, she was able to rise to the top. And
Yes.
so I would say she stuck it. She stuck in there. She gave her service in
Mhm.
opposition, and it was just the right moment for
Yeah.
her, and that has ushered in now this new administration. And so it's sometimes it's just it's within within your own smaller microcosm how people are able to see your worth and your value
Mhm.
and allow that to float to the top. So credit to her party.
Credit to her party. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm excited about this. Um, how did women vote? How did women work with her during the campaign? Because the traditionally women do the groundwork in our Caribbean campaigns. Yes. Um, did she have a solid group of women working separately? Working? How did tell me how this happened? We're curious.
Well, again, I have to. I'm always painfully honest with my people. So, I was not a part of the Anguilla United Front.
Hmm.
I would have followed the Anguilla United Movement, which was then under the chairmanship of the Honorable Hubert Hughes.
Yes.
When the party switched to the composition under Dr. Webster, I had tendered my resignation. I did not, I took a different. I stood back from that. So
Yeah.
I can't claim to be a part of the fabric of
I know. Yes.
understanding what exactly was the team. I do know the Anguilla United Front is a very, it's there are two former chief ministers who are still alive
Hmm. Hmm.
within their ranks. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of history there. But I think that the combination of Mrs. Richardson Hodge, and also her, also within their party, who is now a minister, Mrs. Shirley Webster.
Hmm.
I mean, she also is another indomitable force. And I
Yes.
think that they captured the essence and the energy of women by the fact that they are both feet solid on the ground.
Ground.
And
Mhm.
I think that they just have that level of rapport with the people that demonstrates not just strength, which the male factor will tend to look at,
Yes.
but
Yes.
also from the women in the community to see that they have that level of articulation, strength, taking positions and
Mhm.
rallying shoulder to shoulder when necessary with their male colleagues. And that has happened in the House a few times.
Yes.
I think people had a level of comfort that she is that person who can stem the tide. And that, at
Yes.
the end of the day, is the balance between grace and beauty and force.
There you go. And
the,
women very
the, tri- the
good.
trifecta, the
Yes,
trifecta.
absolutely. Yes, it is so good. It's so good talking to you about this, Josephine. Like I said, we are watching here because we are. I mean, the BVI last election, there were so many women running for office. In Montserrat in October, like in the elections last year, there were almost 50%, like 48% of the candidates were women. Um, but none of them was leading. None of us
Mhm.
leading, and we want to get there. So we are looking to Anguilla. We're wishing Anguilla well, and wishing you. And now, can you just, as we winding down now, tell me from a very let me put it, historical level, put it that way, because Anguilla has been through the difficulties, separating themselves from St. Kitts Nevis. You're having challenges with our administering power. like we are.
Always challenges.
Always challenging. They just seem to multiply. They just seem, here ones that we say, we use, I guess it's an American term. They keep moving the goalpost. Every time you think you have an agreement, then something changes. And, we've had this going over and over and over again. And one of the things that has concerned me, and I know, here on Territories Talk, Chris and Shane and so on feel the same way, the willingness to step past ourselves, on a better term, and begin to work together. I mean, on this program, we have talked with politicians and former politicians, current and former politicians, about the need to work together. And yet, and it's always attractive. It's always an attractive idea, but somehow it's not worked on. Me, I jumped to, there's a woman in the room now, so perhaps we'll get more of that. I'm hoping that we do. However, I know what the challenges are. So I just want to know, how do you feel about the possibilities of an improved kind of dialogue amongst ourselves and between us and quote unquote them? And go ahead.
I think that if the approach that was being adopted as between the territories was, if we take care of the least of us, then we will easily move to ensuring that the whole is taken care of. Then I think that would yield to a better scenario. Oftentimes I found, and this is of course from the window, traveling, seeing the meetings, seeing the discourse between the islands, etc., there's always the feeling sometimes that there's some of the overseas territories who are in a better position. We won't call names, but
no, we won't.
There are those that have a little bit more favor, whose economies are perhaps a little bit more balanced, who
our rich cousins, our richer cousins.
Exactly, the better cousins. So often when we are expressing challenges, there isn't the level of gravitas from them that is as strident as us who are feeling the weight.
Yes.
And so I think that if we got to a point where if Anguilla is having a challenge, I am just at the doorstep with you, holding your hand and being as strong in the room as you are, because you, my sister, are affected. Then I think that yields to a kind of a glue that then allows, when we come into the rooms with the administering power, to be standing as one unit. That often, literally, that historical of divide and rule, it plays itself out, because automatically when you feel, well, I'll just be mildly sympathetic because I'm not walking your shoes, and maybe if your approach were different, you'd have a different result. No, if you came on with the same level of vigor that you see a territory who is under the weight of any particular circumstance, first of all, get into understanding what they're feeling.
Yes.
Because you can't advocate and stand with me unless you understand deeply what exactly I am going through. So there should be those discussions that are happening, not in the monumental, let's have this once a year big. No, you hear that BVI is having an issue. Where is that weekend meeting that says, hey, let's have this roundtable talk? BVI, send us the notes of what's going on so that we understand exactly what you're going through. So that when you are advocating, we're right there because we understand and we are prepared to feel what you feel. So to me, unless we are doing that at the level of the territories, where we are having that intimate conversation and we are prepared to stand as a unit together, it means that when we go before the administrative power, there is no divide and rule. It's you and it's us. Let's have the conversation. So hopefully, you never know. Mrs. Richardson Hodge is now a new person in the room. She has with her Mrs. Shirley Webster, another indomitable force, Rogers Webster.
There she is, yes. Thank you, madam.
Another indomitable force in the room. And so perhaps when they start to liaise with their colleagues in the territories, they may be able to engender this sort of, hey, let's have a glue between us. Because when we have that together, we become one unit when we start to advocate with the administering power.
Wonderful. That's a perfect place again. Thank you so very much, Josephine. Thank you so much. This has been, it has been a pleasure. And
the pleasure is entirely mutual, Ms. Osborne. Such a pleasure to be able to talk to you. And should I say, I look forward to a discussion between you as a former speaker, because we also have a lady. I mean, Anguilla's we're just coming by force.
Just my big
so
man, yes.
We now have a new Speaker of the House. Another, her name is Ms. Tara Carter. She comes also with a legal background. And I encourage you to listen to her opening foray, as it were, her opening speech to the House. I mean, she set the bar high. She was meticulous and articulate about what her expectations are. And I think it would be a perfect segue between you both.
Thank you. We shall do that.
Experience and I'm sure growth and learning on her part.
Passion. From you. Yes. Excellent. All right. Thank you so very much. To our listeners, thank you for listening in. This has been Territories Talk for today, March 20th, 2025. Let me thank once more our media partners, Radio Montserrat, Radio Turks and Caicos Islands, Cayman Marl Road, CBN in the US and British Virgin Islands, Channel 82 in Bermuda, and CBC Channel 8 in Barbados. Thank you very much. Have a pleasant night and have a wonderful year. We're still early enough to say Happy New Year. And we're wishing Anguilla an amazing, wonderful next few years, next forever. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Osborne. Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.